when an exhausted homeless woman gathered the courage to ask a young man for food outside a fancy Manhattan restaurant. She had no idea he was Barron Trump. Nor could she have known that their brief encounter would not only change her life, but also impact the lives of teachers across America. This is the incredible true story of how one desperate request set off an extraordinary chain of kindness. Sarah Jones pulled her thin jacket tighter around her shoulders as the cold November wind whistled between the towering buildings of Manhattan. Her stomach growled so loudly that a businesswoman passing by gave her a startled look before hurrying away in her clicking heels. It had been 2 days, 2 long days, since her last real meal, which had been half a sandwich from a kind deli owner who sometimes helped her out. Sarah touched the smooth stone in her pocket, the only item she had kept from her classroom. One of her third-grade students had given it to her, claiming it was lucky. Some luck, she thought. Just 8 months ago, she had been standing in front of her classroom at PS 183, teaching multiplication and division. She could still picture their eager faces, especially little Maria, who always sat in the front row with her purple butterfly pencil case. Sarah had been teaching for 15 years when everything came crashing down. The cold wind made her eyes water as memories of that terrible day flooded back. The doctors finding something in her routine checkup, the endless tests, and finally, surgery. She had good insurance, or so she thought. But then the bills started to come. First thousands, then tens of thousands of dollars. The insurance company found a loophole, a pre-existing condition, and refused to cover the costs. She passed a fancy shop window filled with shiny Christmas decorations, her reflection showing a woman she barely recognized. Her once neat brown hair hung limp and unwashed, and the coat she wore had come from a church donation bin. Her shoes had holes, letting the cold wind in. "Keep moving," a security guard said, stepping out of the shop doorway. "No loitering." Sarah nodded and shuffled along. She wasn't always sure where she was going anymore, but she knew she had to keep moving. The shelters were full this time of year, and some of them scared her. Last week, someone had stolen her backpack while she slept in one. Now, she kept everything important in her pockets as she walked. Memories flooded her like an unskippable movie. The day she had to sell her car. The final notice on her apartment door. The sad look on her principal's face when she had to resign because she couldn't make it to work anymore. Each memory stung like the cold wind on her face. A delicious smell wafted from a restaurant ahead, Mario's. One of those fancy Italian places where a plate of pasta probably cost more than she made in a day of teaching. Through the windows, she saw people laughing, eating, their faces glowing in the warm golden light. Her stomach cramped painfully. She reached into her pocket and touched the lucky stone again, feeling its smooth surface. Next to it was a folded piece of paper, a photo of her class from last year. She had laminated it before everything fell apart, which was why it had survived so long on the streets. At night, when things felt darkest, she would look at those smiling faces and remember who she used to be. The sky was getting darker, and the temperature was dropping. Sarah knew she needed to find somewhere to sleep soon, but the hunger made it hard to think. She had tried the usual spots, behind the library, near the heating vents of big office buildings, but more and more people were competing for those spaces as winter approached. A group of tourists walked by, excitedly talking about their dinner plans. Sarah tried not to listen, tried not to think about food, but it was impossible. She remembered the last parent-teacher conference night at her school. Everyone brought dishes to share. Mrs. Rodriguez's homemade empanadas, Mr. Chen's dumplings, and Tommy's dad's chocolate chip cookies. Her classroom had smelled amazing that night. The sound of a car door slamming nearby snapped her back to reality. She looked up to see a sleek black SUV parked in front of Mario's. A tall teenage boy in an expensive wool coat stepped out, followed by men in dark suits who scanned the street with alert eyes. Something about the boy caught Sarah's attention. He had a kind face, young but somehow older than his years. He smiled and thanked his driver, which surprised her. Not all rich people did that. Sarah's legs felt weak from hunger and cold. She knew she shouldn't, knew it was probably useless, but something about that boy's smile gave her the courage she hadn't felt in months. Before she could talk herself out of it, She took a step toward Mario's entrance. The security men noticed her immediately, their hands moving to their earpieces. Sarah almost turned back, almost disappeared into the shadows as she had learned to do, but her stomach cramped again. She thought of her students and how she had always taught them to be brave, to ask for help when they needed it. The boy was almost at the restaurant door now, about to disappear inside to join the warm, well-fed people in their cozy bubble. She had a split second to decide, ask for help and risk humiliation, or stay hungry and cold in the growing darkness. Her heart pounding, Sarah took another step forward. The lucky stone seemed to grow warmer in her pocket, almost as if it were encouraging her. The security men were watching her every move. The boy reached for the door handle. It was now or never. Little Maria's voice echoed in her head, "Miss Jones, you always tell us to be brave. That's why I gave you my lucky stone." Sarah opened her mouth to speak. "Wait." Sarah called out softly, her voice shaking. "Please." The boy paused, his hand on the door handle. When he turned around, the streetlights caught his face for the first time. Sarah's heart skipped a beat as recognition slowly dawned on her. She had seen that face before, on television, in magazines, at the grocery store back when she could still afford to shop. There he was, taller in person than she expected, but there was no mistaking those features. That particular way of carrying himself. Barron Trump. Sarah's mouth went dry. Of all the people she could have approached, she had chosen the former president's son. Her courage began to crumble like old bread. The security men were already moving toward her, their faces stern and professional. "Ma'am, please step back," one of them said firmly. Sarah's feet felt frozen to the sidewalk. She watched as one guard spoke quietly into his wrist microphone, probably calling for backup. Another positioned himself between her and the young man. Through the gap between their shoulders, Sarah could see Barron Trump watching her with curious eyes. A memory flashed through her mind, her class discussing current events, the children excited to share what they knew about the president's family. "Miss Jones, did you know the president's son is really tall?" Tommy had proudly announced. The class had laughed because Tommy was the shortest boy in 3rd grade. The memory gave her strength. These men might see a shabby homeless woman, but she had once been Miss Jones, the teacher who made multiplication tables fun and helped scared children feel brave. She straightened her shoulders slightly, trying to remember that feeling. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice clearer now. "I don't mean any harm. Her stomach chose that moment to growl loudly, finishing her sentence for her. More security personnel appeared from somewhere, their black SUVs pulling up silently to the curb. Sarah knew she should walk away. This had been a mistake. She was nobody now, just another hungry face on the streets of New York. But as she started to turn away, she heard a voice, young, yet with a quiet authority that made everyone pause. "Wait a moment, please." It was Barron Trump speaking. The security team exchanged glances, but held their positions. Sarah turned back slowly, clutching her lucky stones so hard it hurt her palm. The young man was studying her face carefully, his expression thoughtful, like he was piecing something together in his mind. "You're shivering," he observed quietly. Sarah hadn't even noticed, but he was right. The wind had picked up, cutting through her thin jacket like it wasn't even there. One of the security men shifted uncomfortably, and she saw his hand move toward his earpiece again. She should say something. Thank him for stopping, ask for help, anything. But the words stuck in her throat like day-old bread. When was the last time someone of importance had really looked at her, had seen her as a person rather than a problem to avoid? The restaurant door opened behind them, releasing a burst of warm air that carried the smell of garlic bread and tomato sauce. Sarah's stomach cramped so hard, she almost doubled over. Through the door, she could see people dining at tables with white tablecloths, their plates piled high with steaming food. Barron Trump glanced over his shoulder at the restaurant, then back at Sarah. His face had changed somehow, like he had made a decision. He took a small step forward, causing his security team to tense. "Sir," one of them warned. But Barron raised his hand slightly. "It's all right, James," he said. Then, to Sarah's complete surprise, he asked, "What's your name?" The question was so normal, so human, that Sarah felt tears spring to her eyes. When was the last time someone had asked her name? Not the shelter workers who just wanted to put a label on a form. Not the police who sometimes moved her along from doorways. Not the busy people who passed her every day without seeing her. She opened her mouth to answer, and that's when she saw the news van turning the corner.